Please, people in editing, make us look good.
Put something in my
Yes.
face. Yeah, I don't mind.
Please.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Put
put an
something in my
emoji
face.
in your
Yeah, an
face so no
emoji.
one needs to see
And
it.
you can
Okay.
say that my parents don't allow my face to be shown on the internet.
I don't mind. You can touch.
Mhm.
Okay.
Something in my face.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emery Cash. I am the host on the Color Coded podcast. And today we have a special episode where we're going to be interviewing some of our club members who are part of our educational pillar to have them talk a little bit about what they've been doing in the club this semester. They're one of the most heavily content producing pillars, though I must say that all pillars within the club are very, very hardworking. Just a little bit of a brief background about the sort of organizational structure of the club. We have a board which is reported to by the heads of each pillar. And the pillars are split into an educational pillar, which is the one we'll be talking about today, which is about the advocacy of the LGBTQI plus community. And we host educational events as well as other opportunities to engage in inclusion of queer people. We then have a careers development pillar, which tackles issues around trying to negotiate corporate life as a queer individual, as well as other really interesting themes pertaining to business. And then we have a community-oriented pillar, which looks to create more of a community environment in a social setting. So today we're talking to the educational pillar, and I'm the president of the club, and I would have everyone on this call please describe what they do and a little bit about their motivation for joining the club.
Hi, everyone. I'm Akil Mambuque. I'm the head of this beautiful pillar, the education. And basically, my main task is to be the glue of everyone's kind of work. So we don't have like a hierarchy. It's more so of a horizontal kind of leadership where we're all trying to find meaning in everyone's work and trying to build and connect with everything. So that's what I do. But I also do a lot of the writing as well because that's one of my passions. Which, answering your question, Emery, was one of the reasons I wanted to join. I wanted to produce more content, more research that is also geared towards just queer experiences in general. So that's why I'm here.
I guess I can go next. So my name is Joana Rochete. I'm doing the master's in management at Nova, and I basically joined the club because I heard about it in the welcome week, and I thought it was a cool club to join because I've never been a part of such a club that deals with these topics. And so yeah, I basically just want to create a more welcoming environment at Nova, and I wanted to join a community in which I felt safe, basically. And my role in the department is more about research, and right now I'm thinking about researching about healthcare and gender equality for a post in the Instagram of the club, in which we don't know yet still the details, but yeah, something about healthcare and gender equality.
Finally, my name is Luís. I'm the podcast producer here. I'm a first year's bachelor. I've always wanted to enter a club like this. Like Joana, I've never been in a LGBT club because where I come from is different. But yeah.
I really appreciate all of those insights. I think that the club sets up a really interesting opportunity to engage in political conversations within the university in a way that I think is so crucial to the inclusion of queer people. And so much of our pillar's pursuit is to make sure that the credibility of our club and the integrity of our club remains within the bubble of advocacy. Can we reflect a little bit about some of the ways in which our work we think has helped in advocating for the queer community?
I think one of the main things that, at least what I feel about our club, is that we are able to touch a lot of different aspects regarding LGBT topics, and we are able to bring attention to these topics in not just for the students but also for the staff. And I think that's important to bring attention to the staff and seeing that the staff interacts with us and shows its interest in our workshops or whatever activities we do. It's really important, and I feel like that's one of the things that I feel more rewarding, is to see that the staff also wants to be involved in this conversation, that it's very important. Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with Joanna. I do believe that everything in life is political in a way, right? So we do bring these topics, so much so that our topics aren't just queer specific, they're just everyday topics that intersects into queerness, right? So it's very interesting, as Joanna said, like getting approached by a staff member and them being like, I heard one of your guys's, podcasts, or I saw you, Emery, speaking, and now I want to know about this and that. Like, that's very impactful, because you wouldn't think that, for example, a very broad topic like that could have such a specific reach, right, of different intersections of people. So our work really has been just showing that queer topics are in everyday topics, right? Every day, like, we have different student clubs that also want to partner with us. So yeah, our work really has been kind of revealing like that. And it's very interesting to start these conversations at school.
Yeah, and I find it really good that like we spread awareness about these issues. Not only about queer issues, like Akil said, it's more broad than that, and spread the word, spread different experiences, because every person is different. So yeah, everyone has their own experiences, and I think it's really good that we managed to spread to multiple people.
I think all of these reflections are spot on. I would totally agree. You know, one of the reasons I joined this club as well was to make sure that the space of the university, which is such a space of privilege in terms of resource and knowledge, was mobilized intentionally to promote and educate around queer issues. And one of the events that I really thought this came to life for me was when we partnered with the Students' Union on their environmental sustainability events. And we did a little bit of a talk about the inclusion of LGBTQ people and rainbow washing. And this event happened sort of in a public space within our university. And then after the event, we were approached by a staff member from the university who worked on the cleaning team, who is from Cape Verde originally. And she voiced to us that the content that we had talked about as a club had been inspiring for her, that she had recognized the struggle for young queer people in her own community back in Cape Verde. And she was really interested in collaborating with us, which we're still trying to figure out the most meaningful way to do that. But it's moments like that that really make me understand why we do this work, how universal this is, right? Akil, when you say everything's political, it's so intrinsic, the ways in which queerness and queer issues are so permeable and permeating through different people's lives. You know, I would love to hear a little bit about reflection or your favorite event or topic or thing that you've done in this club that's been sort of interesting for you.
I will go first, more so because of personal ego reasons, but producing our first article was really a very, very challenging but very rewarding experience, because it pushed me to not to get outside of my box and explore different talents that I didn't know I had. So it was very interesting also seeing like the different reactions to the article, and kind of exposing people to these topics, right? So I think that that was my favorite.
Akil, you wrote this article. Can you describe for us a little bit like what it was about, your process in writing it? It was embedded within our Library Dialogues event, which was a monthly event that we do in collaboration with the library and the Role to Play at the university, under the topic of gender equality in sports, if I'm not mistaken. So if you could just a little bit expand on that for me, that'd be amazing.
Exactly. Our pillar always have weekly meetings in which we always talk about different things that pertains not only to queerness but day-to-day hot topics. And so we decided to talk about gender equality when it pertains to sports, because this semester we wanted to talk about gender equality as a whole in different facets. So it was very interesting I wasn't personally very much into sports like that. So it was, as I said, it was challenging, but it was also awakening because we have another member Raquel, that was talking about so many different experiences that she had faced as a woman as well in sports. So that kind of made it more interesting for me and pushing kind of that boundary. And the process of writing it was also very much a cathartic experience because, as I said, I always have that in mind that everything is political and you can always discover so many different intersections, right, into any topic. So when I was talking about just gender equality in sports, I already had like this buzzword in my mind, like, okay, what about trans inclusion? So as I was doing my research, I literally found that you cannot have like equality in sports without also liberating the most marginalized groups of people that are trans people, and because of patriarchy, trans women, right? So it was a very interesting experience writing that article. And I think that's why it resonated with people so much because they didn't even make that correlation.
I just want to say thank you for putting in the work to make that a rhetoric that we get to think about and hear, because I think you're right. It's such a hot topic if we think about the sort of political rhetoric around the inclusion of trans people within sports. That to be able to read something that was more embedded in research opposed to just political jargon and political leverage, and that to me was really powerful. So I appreciated the contribution of your article for that reason. And I also think that you make some very interesting points within the article where you talk about the ways in which we categorize gender. How do we understand gender from a biological point of view? And how has that sort of been a toxic framework within the sports world? Can you talk a little bit about what you found in that?
Absolutely. The concept of gender is very interesting for me as well as a person of color, as a Black person specifically, because of how, just in general, like gender, race, and class, how all of those kind of influence the way that people are identified in society. I say that as a preface because in sports, for the longest time, there was a lot of problematic kind of concepts that were used to justify certain classifications of people, and that was indifferent, sorry, when it pertained to women as well, because you would see that women would face a more harsher kind of time when trying to participate in sports, and that was for a reason. We would see that to be considered a woman in sports, you would have to pass so many different tests, um, endocrinological tests, hormonal tests, just to prove. And we pose a question in the article as well. Why is this so protected? Why is the definition of women so protected? And we did tie it back to gender, race, and class, to who can be a woman, right? So it was very interesting seeing that and how different societal structures influence that very sacred category in sports in the name of being fair, right? And it kind of forces us to be creative. How can we create this world in which there's gender equality, there's trans inclusion in sports, right? Because in my mind, I was like, okay, since the foundation of this sacred modality is already exclusionary, we need to create something else. So how would that look like? So it was a very reimaginative experience, and we just started the conversation, so we don't have the answers.
And that's part of the joy and part of the work. It's sort of bringing these topics to light and starting to really reckon with them in our own minds. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about advocacy, we often think about the projection of ideas and the projection of knowledge. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing here, and I think that we strive for in the club, is that we understand that to be beacons of advocacy, we need to understand these topics and have like a deeper passion for them ourselves and understand what our framing is. You know, Akil, I really appreciate the effort you put into that article. And I think you bring up political points there that might be uncomfortable for a lot of people to read or to start to reckon with. And part of what Felicia says in a previous podcast episode is that a lot of the times, in order to make change, in order to start a conversation, you often have to create a little bit of a shake or create something that's a little bit more uncomfortable or controversial. You know, Joanna, you are an athlete yourself. I was wondering if you could potentially talk about, from a personal experience, what it's been like in your sports journey, if you found the you know, intersection of gender or race or sexuality be an implicate in your experience.
I think personally myself, being an ex-athlete, I've never faced it personally. I've never felt like I was put aside for being a woman. But I feel like if we look at the sports mentality, at least in Portugal, there's a lot more focus, even media focus, on men's sports, like I said. And I think there's been a change, let's say, in the mentality, but there's a lot to do yet. And I feel like, let's say, women's basketball is still in the back of people's mind when compared to men's basketball. At least I know that worldwide it's that way, and in Portugal is that way also. But at least in my perspective, I feel like basketball in Portugal has been trying to change this mentality and trying to increase, like, for example, the advertisement regarding women's basketball, so that people know what's happening. And if people know what's happening, at least there's a start, and people can start looking into the sport and seeing like the women's basketball is interesting, and it's different from the men's basketball, because of course there's not the same thing. There's other focus that maybe men's basketball is more physical, but in my perspective, at least, I prefer women's basketball because it's more tactical, let's say that way. So if people are more open to seeing these sports and going to women's basketball games, or even outside of basketball, let's say football, people start being aware of these sports that happen, and that can start changing things and bringing attention. And I feel like attention, it's the most important thing, because if people are aware of things, they start to spread the word, and more people start being like, okay, let's go see a game, let's go support the teams. And with more support, things start happening. And I think that's important. And I feel like Portugal still has a lot of room for improvement, but I feel like the change has started, at least in my personal, the things that I still have contact in the sport, and I'm curious to see how that develops in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible sort of move forward. It reminds me of a conversation we had when we were operating our inclusivity language workshop at the university, which is a workshop that we do to try to encourage more inclusive practices. One of the comments we had from a participant was, you know, this incremental nature of gender equality, in which we say, okay, you know what, first it was, you know, a cis male world. Now we have more women empowerment. And by women empowerment, I mean cis women empowerment. And that's what gender equality means right now for a lot of people. It's cis women empowerment. And then it's almost like, okay, so we had this, we're now here, and we're still trying to achieve this well of the cis women empowerment. And only when we have this down, can we then help, you know, the trans people and the gender diverse people. And I'm critical of that timeline, because I think that, you know, as you're speaking about, Joanna, you're already like diverse people of diverse gender identities. So people who are not cis men are marginalized in sports beyond an ability to have any agency. So the fact then that, you know, women's sports only becomes you know, protected when trans people are going to come in. It's only when you have a trans woman trying to play on a women's sports team that you actually care about women's sports kind of mentality, that the hypocrisy of the system is really come to light. And as a female, as a woman who is an athlete, that must feel sort of like, oh, for God's sake, like it's it's a reactory kind of liberation. And so when you talk about having more space for women's sports, especially around appreciating the ways in which the sport itself can be diverse, I think that's really cool. I think that's really key, right? Because that's what sports is, it's strategy. It's strategy to achieve a goal. So arguably the differences in bodies and everything, it's just about managing your strategy around that.
I agree with what you said. It's a lot of small changes that still need to happen so that we can look at the sports as an equality stage in which everyone that wants to play can play with being himself or herself or themselves. You know, it's like you still have a lot of room for improvement, like I said, and yeah, we, at least in Portugal and in my community in sports, we still look at it like, okay, let's bring attention to women's sports. And then I feel like after bringing attention to women's sports, then people start thinking about trans women, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be like everyone that wants to play and let them play, you know? So I feel like the change has started, but yeah, like I said, it's a changing environment that still needs to change a lot so that people can play being themselves, and that's the most important thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, so given that gender equality is our sort of anchoring theme, and as Akil mentioned earlier, we like to understand gender equality beyond the binary, to understand gender equality beyond cis women liberation. We've been investigating the reality of gender equality in healthcare, specifically within the Portuguese context. Our school is in Lisbon, Portugal, and so we're interested in making sure that we're engaging in the sort of local rhetoric around these conversations, even though we come from international backgrounds. Akil, you have been working this semester as well on this topic as well on an article with a colleague, Carolina. I was wondering if you could describe for us a little bit about what you've been researching and found in light of gender equality and healthcare in Portugal.
Yes, this month we are researching on gender equality and access to healthcare, specifically in Lisbon, Portugal. And me and Carolina, we have been researching about it, and we have found that there's been a lot of push to try to democratize healthcare services even more, especially in Portugal, right? More specifically towards marginalized groups and groups that need more assistance, i.e., women, pregnant women, disabled people, right? So when researching, we did find that there's a lot of research that has been made towards like ableist policies, right? And we talk about ableism, but we don't think about like what happens to pregnant women who are disabled as well. And Carolina does talk about pregnancy as a form of gender equality, right? When it comes to healthcare, because we don't talk about how the most sensitive or most close experience that a woman will have is pregnancy, and how oftentimes policymakers don't really pay that much attention, right, towards to that, or like they don't pay as much attention when it pertains to just being there and like being present to throughout the entire pregnancy. So on our research, we did find that Portugal is very much developed when it comes to that. They do push a lot of policies for, here we have family doctors, right? I know a lot of countries, they don't even have that, but there's still a lot that still needs to be accomplished. We also found that research that was actually conducted by Professor Pica Barros from Nova as well, that a lot of women that experience violence, domestic violence at home, would much rather not go get access to healthcare, right? Because it's cheaper, it's more expensive to just stay quiet. So it kind of brought a different nuance to the conversation, like how the people don't consider like domestic violence victims when they're talking about access to healthcare, right? Like that's also a huge part of the female experience, unfortunately. So it there have been positive, moves, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex conversation to start having when we start talking about healthcare, because as you sort of bring up, we're talking about both the political implications as well as the sort of legitimate health and biological realities of dealing with healthcare. One of the things that I'm really interested to chat about during our event on Tuesday, where we will be talking with some people who work within the nonprofit sector to help women gain better agency within the healthcare system here. One of the things I'm really interested to hear about is not only just the political pushback and political environment, but the ways in which the efforts to include pregnant women in the healthcare system is reflecting the greater ways in which we might have seen women's bodies in the past. And by this, I mean, why is it that women, even pregnant women, who are seen as some of the most vulnerable people in our society at the time, if you think about like on the bus, you give space for women to sit down if they're pregnant. In the shopping mall, you let someone who's pregnant go first. So I'm interested to understand, like, if we're seeing this in society, which gives you this false impression that women are protected, why are we not seeing that in the hospital? And, Akil, we've had this conversation a little bit before. Do you mind just sort of explaining to me what your thoughts are on that?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting to analyze how society kind of reacts to women depending on what they can gain. Society, because there's women as property, right? And then there's women, the person. It's very interesting how a pregnant woman is very much protected, but not because of what she wants, not because of her own desires or agency, but it's more so because she's carrying for someone's property, basically. Like, to have children is to pass down your own wealth, it's property, right? So that's why it's very important that people always emphasize, okay, women, you need to take care of pregnant women. But what about what they want, right? What about, oh, when they're in the hospital, who's like taking care of her needs if she's feeling pain? People don't talk about all of these other experiences. What about the pregnant woman that is now a mother, right? What is what kind of measures are we taking to assist her in that process? So that's what kind of made me realize that, okay, like, that love and desire and compassion that people extend is not because they are they like appreciate women so much. No, it's because of other motives. Because as soon as you give birth as a woman, it's almost like, okay, you're expected to go back to work, whatever, but they don't recognize that there's a lot to be done with it. And even having a conversation about like the education, right, when it comes to sexual health and everything. And I would like to know, for example, in your case, Joanna, how has that been per se? Because we talk about access to healthcare, right? But we don't talk about educating people, educating women. To democratize all of these services, we kind of also need to demystify and kind of like remove the taboo behind certain, like how so many people can't even talk about um people's sexual health without laughing. So I would like to understand, for example, in your case, Joanna, did you always feel like you had a healthy and safe space to have these conversations? Did you know what was happening with your body, for example, all of these things as a woman?
I've never felt like I had a safe environment to talk about this type of stuff. At least in school, I think I had one class about sexual health, and that was it. And I was like in 9th grade, probably. And it's, of course, it's always people start laughing, and it gets so messy, and you don't learn anything basically. And I think the most, I'm grateful because I have a twin sister, so we kind of talk between each other, and I have a lot of older sisters that helped me. And basically, yeah, I think I learned because with my sister, and with the changes that were happening in our body, we learn together. But in school, I think you just don't talk about it. At least I didn't talk about it. I'm not sure how the school programs are now, but I think I see in my nephews, and I don't think they talk about it still. I think it's one of the things that needs to change, at least in Portugal, because if you learn, you know how to deal with things, and you will be more safe in sexual health or whatever. And yeah, I think I had my twin sister, I had my older sisters that taught me, and I had the internet, which is also kind of, it's a dual thing, because you can find good things and you can find really bad things that you don't learn anything. So you always have that thing in which you can find things that don't help you and even get you in a worse position. So I think myself, I had my family, my sisters, and if I hadn't my sisters, I only had the internet. And like I said, the internet can have its good things, but it also has a lot of bad things. So I think that sexual health is one of the most pressing needs in Portugal, at least. I'm not sure how's how is it looking right now, but at least a couple no more, like 5 years ago it wasn't good, or even existing almost. So
Luís, what has been your experience? You were raised in Madeira, which is not mainland Portugal. Can you talk a little bit about what you experienced as sexual health?
Well, I'm in the same situation as Joana. I've only had like one sex ed class, and yeah, and it was that, and everyone was laughing. Nobody like got anything from that class, so it was kind of pointless, I guess. And I think one thing that I have to point out too is that it's so heteronormative, because they don't talk about like, oh, what you gotta do if you like have a sexual intercourse with the same sex. Like those things I'm only gonna find out in the internet, because no one in my family or no one in school is gonna tell me about that.
Amen, amen. And I think, when we talk about the heteronormativity of these things, I would agree with you. I went to a pretty like robust liberal school, and our sex education was pretty okay in terms of, it was quite persistent at different ages. We had different things told to us, but I will agree with you that it was constantly heteronormative. There was no space to talk about queerness, and there was no space to talk about gender, right? And I think when we think about sexual health, we've got to align with the distinction between your gender experience, your sexuality, and the ways in which those two things come together in your sexual experience. And so, moving forward, I would love to maybe create some ideas amongst us in the club, and anyone else who's listening to this who has some interesting ideas, please, message us on Instagram or contact us through our website if you have any tips on how we can start to create a more liberalized sex education. Great. So as we come to the sort of end of this podcast episode, I would love to hear if you could reflect a little bit about some of the triumphs you've experienced as being part of the club, and if you would see this or suggest this club for other people who are at the university.
I would say like my main triumph is the opportunity to keep learning about these relevant topics. And I would say that by being in this club, I was able to learn a lot, and I'm able to learn a lot. And all these topics that we mentioned are topics that I've never researched or even like learned a lot about them. So by having the chance to talk about them towards such different perspectives of different people around the world, I've been able to learn a lot, and I will definitely recommend this club to anyone that is interested in these topics and that wants to learn more. And yeah, come and be happy.
Yeah, mine are similar as Joanna's actually. Besides the work that we've been doing, I think being a part of something that is very revolutionary has been very satisfying. And I think not only self-aggrandizing, but has been something that kind of showed me and showed us that we've been making work that is bigger than us. When people come to us for social work, as Emery, you mentioned, right? A staff member wanted our help, or other colleagues come to us, even just little things such as like representing, right? The queer body of the Nova faculty. People come to me are like, wow, there's queer people here. You know, there's this sense of safety that we're creating, which is very beautiful, right? We create this energy, like this sense of safety to other queer students. So I think that tops everything else. Being a part of something that will leave like a legacy years to come.
Yeah, for me, like being in this club is already the best experience because I really love editing videos and like, so this is why I'm here. The best experience for me was like the recording of the podcast that's gonna come off afterwards. And I like to see how different experiences can shape different people. It's so interesting for me.
I totally second all of your thoughts here. And I think, bringing up the idea of, or the power of representation, the crucial need to have that be something that is intentional and that is here to be a supporting mechanism. One of the interesting things I think I've experienced here is, within the university, obviously there are challenges, right? There are challenges around incorporating or having more meaningful inclusion of queer people. But I'm so encouraged, Akil, I think you mentioned this, I'm so encouraged by the small triumphs of engaging with faculty members who might not have had this conversation before. So my final reflection would also be that I'm super encouraged to see how many allies join our movement. These are not just queer people who identify as queer. We have to be a community of people on both sides for this to be a meaningful movement and a meaningful effort of inclusion. So as the president, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been involved, especially you three who work tirelessly within the education pillar and bring content that is so critical to the inclusion of queer people. And to the greater club community, I just want to say thank you for your resilience, for being visible, for taking up space in sometimes an uncomfortable way, an uncomfortable environment to do so. That is, I think, super inspiring. And I believe that we have a great impact on this campus and beyond. If you'd like to learn more about what we do as a club, you can visit our website. Our link is in the bio. We will also provide links to the article that Akil has written, as well as any other materials that we think might be relevant. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please get in touch if you would like to. We are the Nova SBE Pride Association. We are on Instagram and online. So please do hit us up and check out our other podcast episodes. Thank you so much. I'm Emery Cash. This is Akil, Joanna, and Luís. We are part of the Nova Pride Association, and we'll see you next time.